live now. Hello, everybody. Um,
Hello.
I don't know how many people are actually watching. I know there's a couple, but um, it we've got the Dungeon Delver with us tonight, along with me. I thought, this is sort of an impromptu live stream. I've done one or two before, and one never knows where these things are going to go. So, um, it why is this not live on my channel? Uh, we wanted to take a little time to talk about dads,
Mm-hmm.
and in particular because I don't think dads get enough street cred these days. Um, and dads are Mother's Day is always this big deal where the world stops and mom goes to the spa for 8 hours and dad takes care of everything. And Father's Day is always the day where, hey, Dad, you can barbecue for us, right? And it's always which,
Right.
which is cool. I don't mind doing it, right? It's kind of have fun with it, but it got me thinking about my dad, who's been gone for a dozen years now, as most fathers do. It I wanted to kind of take a moment to kind of talk about the contribution dads make, because so often dads get sort of this bad rap as the guy that just, oh, my dad disappeared, I never knew him, I never knew this, I didn't. Well, okay, but not all dads are like that, right? And some dads do put in the hours, and I'd like to think I'm one of those. So much so that my kids are like, Dad, can you go away and leave us alone on occasion? It's kind of a nice little change. And my dad, I don't know about you, Bill, but I'm going to tell you the kind of dad my dad was. My dad was a software engineer, but that didn't define him, right? That was his day job. But he was a software engineer from 1962 until he retired in 2002. So we're talking like punch card all the way through, Y2K level software
Right.
engineer. Was one of the worked on banking systems, insurance systems, credit card swipe systems, ATM systems, all kinds of high end stuff. But that really still didn't even define him. But one of the things he taught me early on that's always stuck with me is that engineers and scientists are much better off when they are creative people. You can memorize all the engineering you want. You can do, oh, the book says do this. What happens when there's no book? Right? What happens when the solution's never been done before and you got to go invent something new? You need somebody that, yes, knows the technology, yes, knows the book, but also can think outside that book. And one of the things my dad used to do a lot of, and I got to join in at a fairly young age, was he would read quite often. He always had a fiction book in his hand. He always had a paperback book in a pocket someplace. And he
Mm-hmm.
introduced me to, Bill, I don't know if you've seen this game when I was probably 11 years old. Av-
Yes. Yes.
Avalon Hill's Third Reich.
Be careful how much of that you show on the screen. Remember.
I know. Probably be canceled for that one these days. But
Right.
you can be the Americans and beat up the Germans. It's okay.
Exactly so.
But that kind of stuff, I do believe, fosters creativity.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad was one of those players that he didn't take it easy on you just because you were a kid. He wanted you to really learn. He'd beat you up in the game and then show you what you did wrong, but he wouldn't take it easy on you per se. He would actually kind of go after you, which I thought was kind of cool. But I take it easy on my kids on occasion. Like I'm a little different, especially since my kids are old. Well, they're getting a little older now, but when they were a little younger, if we were playing a war game, chess, Third Reich, 1776, any of the Avalon Hill stuff, yeah, and they're doing something, I'd be like, "Are you sure you want to do that?" And my son would stop and look at it and be like, "Maybe not." So my dad would never do that sort of thing.
Right.
So is there something about your dad that kind of sticks in your head as like this was the stuff that sort of defined being a dad?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, my pop was always now I didn't know this until like way later in my dad's life. I always thought that yes, we had been to Florida when I was a youngster, but I didn't realize my dad lived here for a couple of years after he got out of the Air Force and worked on ICBMs for Martin Marietta. But he decided that wasn't his jam, so he went into construction and stuff like that. And dad was always, he was always a hammer swinger, He worked in a steel mill in Gadsden, Alabama, for most of my formative years. And when he wasn't working in the steel mill, he was hanging drywall. So There were a lot of weekends where it was like, it's Saturday, Dad's got to go to work. But I didn't realize it until much later, just how much of a nerd my dad actually was. And I found it out in some interesting ways. When my dad got ill, dad passed away in 2010. And when Pop got sick, he had a lot of time on his hands. He was now this is going to sound terrible the way I say it, but the guy that he worked for really liked him a lot, and Dad really liked working there, but he was forcibly retired. My dad's boss basically said, no, you are going to go home and rest, and if you get past this, then you come back. So Dad unfortunately had a lot of time to sit idle. And at that time, there was a miniatures war game by Avalon Hill, or at least the company that has the name Avalon Hill, called Axis and Allies Miniatures. And I've still got like a fishing tackle box full of Axis and Allies miniatures. But I said, Dad, you want to give this a try? And he said, sure. So I bought him a couple of starter packs and that sort of thing. And we sat down and we had a few sessions of Axis and Allies miniatures. And I remember playing with him for the first time. It's a really, really simple game. But my dad took two German tanks. I think he had a Panther and a Tiger II. And I had 5 Allied tanks. One of them I remember distinctly was a Churchill. The other was a Lee. And then I want to say the others were like Shermans, like nothing special Shermans. And he disintegrated me. I mean, he just had these two things. And I remember he said, he's looking at the map board layout there. And he says, I'm going to go after that Churchill first because it's the biggest tank you've got. Like physically the biggest tank I have. So, if you can imagine a Panther and a Tiger II firing on a British, Churchill tank, it just, it's just gone. It's just toast.
It just turns into a crater because
basically. Huge. So, in him maneuvering to chase down the Grant, I did get a couple of Shermans behind the SS Panther 2 and Tiger 2, and I blew it away. But then the Panther got around and finished me off and then limped off the battlefield. But my dad really enjoyed it. So we played Axis and Allies a few more times after that. And the story about my dad being a geek, actually, I'm going to try to tell this without getting choked up. But when Star Wars came out, we were not well-off folks. And my dad had grown up. My dad introduced me to all kinds of sci-fi. All my love of science fiction came from my dad. And my dad had wanted like a tin Buck Rogers toy when he was a kid. And his old man said, no, that's sissy garbage. You don't get that.
And they were kind of expensive. I mean, they weren't, for the time, they weren't inexpensive.
Yeah.
Toys.
So when Christmas after Star Wars rolled around, my dad got me like the core set of action figures, and I've still got them, that you could get, and an X-Wing fighter. And he told my mom, Bill's going to have this. I'm going to make sure he has this. I want him to have this and have fun with it. And told her about the Buck Rogers thing. And I didn't find that out until after my pop had passed away. And I just, deep in his heart, my dad was right there shoulder to shoulder with Moral Panic over Dungeons and Dragons, but he got science fiction was something that Pop got. So Pop got me for that Christmas just this huge raft of Star Wars figures and an X-wing fighter, and it was all because deep down inside, Pop really enjoyed that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, my dad, he was a little bit different. He wanted you to read and kind of exercise that part of your brain, or he also kept sort of the latest and greatest personal computer around the house. But he was an engineer, so it was like sort of a double-edged sword. But he also wanted me to learn from an early age how to do that kind of stuff. So he really kind of pushed me to do my own things, and he was pretty happy when I was. I forget the age, but we had a Trash 80 Model 1. I mean, a TRS 80 Model 1. Or was it a Model 2? And it's the green screen with the tape drive and like 2K of memory or something.
Right.
It was terrible. Pre Commodore 64. It was really not the most powerful machine in the world. And I went, and there was this book it came with that had some basic programs in the back you could type into the machine, right? And I typed a couple of them in, and I made some modifications. And Dad was like, that was his crowning achievement of proud, right? He was like, "Oh my god!"
Right.
And so from that point forward, we had computers around the house all the time. And the one thing Dad would do is, if you say, "Hey, Dad, I want this toy, I want this bike, I want this whatever," he'd find chores for you to go do, so you could earn it. But if you said, "Hey, Dad, there's this book out I want," you were in the car on the way to the bookstore. Like there was like almost no questions asked when it was that kind of stuff. So it was kind of interesting. But another thing that sticks out in my head about him, and I was watching something last night. I was watching old George Carlin things on one of the streaming channels. And my dad was, before he was an engineer, he was actually studying to be a Catholic priest. So if that tells you, now that I've written a book about a Catholic serial killer, you'd think he'd come back to haunt me. But wait, there's more. Especially when Dad also had this sense of humor. He would never laugh at much of anything. He would just kind of, he was a tough audience, right? He was just kind of tough to get over the top. But having studied to be a priest, then he's watching George Carlin, and George Carlin does his bit. This was probably 80s, 90s, someplace. It's like, I grew up Catholic, and then I reached the age of deductive reasoning. My dad just about fell out of the chair laughing at Carlin, going, "Yeah, I was Catholic, and then I thought about some things, and then I'm not." Right? Here's a guy who was studying to be a priest. So what I took from that lesson was that it's okay to laugh at yourself on occasion, right? It's okay to have a sense of humor about things. And that's one of the reasons I kind of wanted to do some things online these days, and even thought about doing this live stream, even if nobody watches, is that I think we've forgotten how to laugh at ourselves. And I don't think you need to look much further than the gaming community to realize there's a lot of people out there these days without a freaking sense of humor.
Yeah.
And it's okay once in a while to be like, hey, let's do something that doesn't have to have some inner, deep, grand meaning. Or let's do something that we don't have to just nitpick and just destroy before we get out the front door. It's that sense of humor actually matters. You don't have to have it all the time. You don't have to laugh at everything. Not every joke is funny, but it is okay to be able to laugh at yourself. And here's a guy who grew up Catholic, who went to church every Sunday, was active in the church, made me go to Sunday school through the age of 15. And then I was allowed to make my own choices, but he could laugh at the Catholic, especially George Carlin. I mean, Carlin was hilarious. I think we've lost that in our modern society. And I think even before his death, he's been gone 12 years now, because it was right a little bit before my daughter was born. So he's been gone about 12 years. But, even then he was kind of like, as a society, we just don't know how to, and he rarely cursed. But, one of the last times I talked to him, when he still remembered who I was, he was like, this country just lost its fucking sense of humor completely. And this being an election year, I suspect our sense of humor is going to be completely gone out the window, because nobody's going to laugh at anything. And yeah, there's no owlbear sneaking up on us. But although my back still hurts from that last time. But the point is that I think the one thing the world does need is for us to actually be able to relate to each other more. And I think you need to look no further than the number of people I had to block after discussing some stuff on Harmony's channel, and some people who have just gotten just downright nasty, that you're unwilling to bow down and say, yes, you are exactly right, and I will cease playing a role playing game the way I play it, and bend over backwards to do it your way, right? And people just have no sense of humor about that kind of stuff, and I get
Well,
it. Everybody has their preferred method, but your method doesn't make my method wrong. It just makes us different.
I'm going to say this. I'm not going to start reading quotes and proverbs out of the Dungeon Master's Guide. Don't worry. But
Oh, come on.
I just wanted to point something out. This book has 6 cartoon panels in it.
Yeah.
Cartoon panels by Bill McLean. Dragon Magazine is full of stuff he did. Bill McLean, in addition to being a political cartoonist, was a tabletop gamer. All right?
Mm-hmm.
There's jokey stuff in the Monster Manual. There's jokey stuff in the Player's Handbook.
Yeah.
When I sat down to play D&D with Gary, one of the last times I saw him before he passed away, he and my wife and I and a couple of other people sat down to play, and I remember he said, okay, everybody, let's be real serious now. This is a serious, dramatic role-playing game here, so we got to be super serious. I mean, right off the bat, Gary's laughing at himself. He's laughing at us. You know, he wanted things to be enjoyed. He was not like this super serial, we gotta, no laughing at the table, no fun havers at my table. I mean, Gary wanted people to have fun.
What was the Dean
D&D.
from Animal House? No more fun of any kind.
Yeah, exactly. Dean Wormer.
Yeah, Dean Wormer.
Dean Wormer.
But
But-
yeah, I mean, the other one that my dad used to laugh at a lot, and I remember when the first time I brought home a VHS to the house. It might have been on cable or something, but it was at my dad's house, and the movie Back to School was available for home use, right?
Mm-hmm.
And my dad was like, I'm not watching that crap. And he was in the other room kind of playing chess. My uncle was in town for some reason, and he and his brother were playing chess and discussing something. And I remember had to be VHS. The Sam Kinison bit comes up.
Right, when he's playing the history professor.
and
History is sacred to me.
my dad's like, my dad walks through and goes, back that up a second. I was like, what? He goes, I love this. It's like, what? It's just like, do you know how many academics I would just absolutely love to have said stuff like that to? He wasn't keyed in on the Sam Kinison part. He was keyed in on the Rodney Dangerfield part. He's like, you want the right answer here? I'll give you the right answer, because MacArthur was too much of a wimp to go in there and kick out those commie bastards, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, and my dad, the funny part to my dad, one of the funny parts to my dad was, yeah, he loved chess, he loved backgammon, he loved whatever it was. He never wanted to play poker with that man. He had no tells. Although humorous story about that in a minute. But he was, his baby brother, my Uncle Bob, is a history professor in New England, a place called Albertus Magnus University. And when my dad retired, my uncle used to give him crap for years that you can't intellectually contribute to the world without a PhD.
Mm-hmm.
And here's my dad, who dropped out the last semester in college to go become an engineer, because you can still do that then. You can't do that.
Right.
And so when he retired, he took up this hobby. My uncle specializes in the Revolutionary War period of the United States. When you live in Connecticut, it's what you do as a historian. He started researching some things and managed to get 2 papers published in peer-reviewed journals in my uncle's field of study, and would send his baby brother autographed copies of papers. No PhD necessary, dude. Here you go. So he was a lot of fun. But he had this. My dad had this weekly poker game, and this sounds like the opening to a joke, but it absolutely isn't. He was so active in the Catholic Church. His weekly poker game was with a priest, a bishop, and occasionally a cardinal, and sometimes it would be a spare priest. Which
you're right. That does sound like the start of a joke.
Retired engineer, bunch of people. The only deal was you could sit in on the game, but you weren't allowed to bring up religion or confession or anything else, because it was their day off and they didn't want to talk about it. Which I get. Even clergy need a day off, right?
Sure.
And I was sitting down on the game. I was in my 20s. I was in the army at the time, and I was visiting. And my dad's poker game came up, and I was staying with my parents for a week or two for something. And Dad's like, "Oh, you want to sit down on the game?" I'm like, "Yeah, we play in the barracks all the time. We'll see if I can take you, old man." Yeah. And my dad, of course, father son, you can read each other really well there. I could never figure out my dad's tells. He knew mine in microseconds, right? So I am never going to be able to I would never be able to take my dad down at poker. But I bluffed the ever living shit out of the bishop at one point, and my dad was like, "Show him what you had." I was like, "He folded. I don't have to show him anything." He's like, "Show him what you had." Dad reaches over, flips over my cards. I had like high 9 or something, but I managed to bluff the man of the cloth. And the guy's like, I can speak to the Pope if I want to, right? So it's like what? Because I got like a direct line to God. You're gonna lie to a really? I was like, it's bluffing. There's difference. I didn't say I.
There you
But
go.
yeah, that was my dad's sense of humor.
My
Benny
pop.
Hill.
Benny Hill,
yes.
Dave Allen. Dave Allen was
my
awesome.
dad. When we would watch Benny Hill, my dad would wait to try to. If my mother started making noise, like she was headed towards that part of the house, the channel would get changed.
Same. Like me. If me and my dad were up late at night, I remember him saying, what was it? Oh hell, son, this is just the Three Stooges with titties.
That's all it is.
That's my dad. He did not like Monty Python. Monty Python was an acquired taste, and I get it, but
Monty Python people either absolutely love it or they don't get it, and there's just almost nothing in the middle.
Yeah. My pop was a good chess player. And better than me. Like I am a poor chess player. I'm just going to state that right now. And Dad, God bless his patience, tried to teach me everything he knew, but like he could just beat me up and down the board constantly. So I tried not to ever challenge him to a game, but the one thing, he absolutely hustled me and a then friend of mine. We met for a birthday dinner. I think it was a birthday dinner, or maybe it was just an evening out or something. But there's an Irish pub, like as in run by Irish expats here in Central Florida. Well, there are many here in Central Florida, but this particular one is called Fiddler's Green, and we went over there. And my dad started playing pub darts with us, and he started slow, Tim. He bled us slow, and then he turned up the heat and just smashed us like 3 cricket games in a row. I just looked at my friend at the time and I said, "Dude, I think we just got hustled." And he said, "Yeah, I'm glad we didn't have any money on this." And I was like, "Yep." So, but yeah, my dad would, he would try just about any kind of game once, and I'm glad I got him to sit down and play Axis and Allies. I only have one funny computer story about my dad, and before we got a computer, we had an Atari 2600, and I think probably the only reason. Everybody. It was like, welcome to white suburbia in the 1980s. Here's your Atari 2600, your copy of Fleetwood Mac Rumors, and your members only jacket. Take a seat.
Last time I looked up the numbers was a couple of years ago, but until 5 or 6 years ago at least, 2600 was still the best-selling console of all time.
Yeah. I think
like by no small margin. It was.
I think the PS2 finally passed it, and the thing about it is, they kept producing variants of the 2600 to the mid 1990s.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you start looking at like the re-release, like, the ultra mini ones that are just like a system on a chip that has a bunch of games stored in a flash library, they're still producing them. Yeah. You
can get it on a single chip now. It's just annoying. Yeah.
Well, like these mini arcade games I've got here, these are what are called NOACs, Nintendo on a chip. So there's a whole SNES in there that they wrote. The game Pac-Man's not plugged in right now, but that's a Galaga ROM running on a SNES that has been shrunk down to a single
Oh,
chip.
I've got 8 of the arcade 1-up machines running around here,
Right on.
and it's nothing in the world but either an Arduino or a Raspberry Pi in the back.
Yeah.
It's nothing.
Yeah, it's not like you go look at pictures of like original hardware, and there's like a 1.5 by 1.5 circuit board with like 8 cards in it. You know, it's just insane.
Oh,
but
I used to have several of the upright old actual arcade games.
yeah,
And just keeping those things running is a pain because you constantly have to change capacitors out because they're always drying out.
Yeah. But Dad, I remember this distinctly. Kmart was having a sale in their electronics. Dad knew I wanted a computer, and we were this close. We were an afternoon trip away from going to Kmart and buying the Spectra Video computer add-on for the 2600 for my first computer.
Wow.
The thing had a kilobyte of RAM and a 2 kilobyte ROM that held BASIC. And I, as a kid, thought this would be a pretty spiffy idea. And one of my sister's boyfriends talked him out of it, said that just, and I was steamed. I'm like, I was this close to having my own computer. And he's like, trust me, you don't want that. And now years and years and years later, I went back and I said, whatever. I gotta look that up on YouTube. And I looked at, oh yeah. It was not good. It was not good. Thank you. So like the next Christmas, I got a proper computer. I got a VIC-20 and a data set. And I learned
big stuff then.
Yeah, I learned to program BASIC on that. And then like, I don't know, like a couple years later, we got a Commodore 64. And I think by the time I had started to age out of the C64, I was old enough that I needed to go buy this crap on my own. So, the last computer I had gifted to me, I made the dean's list my first semester in college, and Pop, like there were 2 models of Amiga computer that were out at the time, the 500 and the 2000, and Dad wanted to buy me a 2000 and a monitor and a hard drive, and it was like close to $4,000. I was like, I felt terrible. I was like, Dad, please don't spend all that money on me. Here, this is called an Amiga 500. It's the same basic thing, and I can plug it into my color TV at home. I really wish I hadn't done that, but it was like $700 or $800 versus like $4,000. But that's all the computer stories about my dad. I'm sorry, I'm meandering.
No, I had a question for you. I've always wanted to ask. Right, so
okay.
We're kind of talking about dads, and one of the people that one of the things about my dad that or some dads is they leave work at work, and then when they come home, they're actual humans, right? And even people who have dads who work in high end stuff, sometimes it's nice to go home. And I've had some jobs, and my career is such that I've worked with some people who like are instantly recognizable names, right? They just people know who they are, and if I say them, and I don't want to name drop, but if I say them, people are like, oh hey, I know who that is, right? And these are people I've published papers with, or I've worked on projects with, and one of which is actually one of the projects I found out yesterday when I was talking to somebody still on the International Space Station. We built a radiation sensor for neutrons. But it's one of those things where you meet these people, and then you're like, hey, you think about their life outside of work, and they're dads, their husbands, their whatever. So not everybody looks at them like, oh, professor this or professor that. And one of the guys you got to work with was one of those people, right? Gary Gygax. You worked with him a bit. And I kind of think of him a bit like the Carl Sagan of RPGs, for a particular reason, right? Okay. Carl Sagan had this way. I remember he was an astrophysicist for 40 years, right? I mean, forever. And but when he would describe a nebula or a galaxy, he could have seen it 30 times before, and it still seemed like the first time he ever came across it. He still had that childlike sense of wonder about him when he was trying to describe these things. Was that what playing an RPG is like with Gary? Did he still have that sort of, I'm a big kid now and I get to go play adventure games with my friends?
So there's there's two answers to your question, and then because you brought Gary up, I want to tell a Gary story that is pertinent to Father's Day. So the short answer is Gary always seemed to enjoy himself. Gary, the first time I played with Gary was Castles and Crusades, a fine game, at Milwaukee Game Fest in 2004. It was the first time we met face to face, even though we talked and exchanged emails. And there was not, I did not feel that there was even a bit of routine, like, I got to run D&D for a bunch of nerds at this con, and then I can go back to my hotel and, have a brandy and a cigarillo and be done with this. No, Gary seemed to thoroughly enjoy the absolute smackdown that he put on us. It was a TPK, in case you're wondering, Tim. So I've been on the other side of it too. So yes, now a lot of people say, like, well, I met Gary in this time and I found him to be kind of an arrogant, dismissive, cold person, and so on and etc. All I can speak to for Gary is the roughly 8 years that I knew him. So if somebody says they had a bad experience with Gary, or that Gary wasn't nice to them, or that he kind of, phoned things in, is I can only speak to my personal experience with Gary. I'm not trying to elevate the man to godlike status, but conversely, I'm not going to tear him down to fit an agenda that sometimes people tend to bring. So I feel like Gary absolutely loved games and gaming. He was working on stuff almost literally to the day he passed away. He was working on things, and when things went awry and there were some misdeeds that caused a manuscript I was working on for Gary to not get published, I was certain that Gary was going to be like, well, you had your shot and you screwed it up. Literally, he said, don't worry about that. I want you to work on these other things now. Let's not focus on that. Let's just, it was very like, that play is over. Now it's time for this play, So that was both my personal and working relationship with Gary, and that dovetails I'm sorry, go ahead if you got.
No, that's interesting, because I see a lot, and I'm Tuesday night, Tuesday or mid afternoon. I'm doing a live stream on the suicide crisis and with veterans and active duty military. And one of the things that we've uncovered is that there's this sort of zero defect policy in a lot of companies, and especially in the military, where it's like, oh my God, you had this one tiny little problem that has nothing with you doing your job. We're going to burn you to the ground now, right? We live in this society where defects are not allowed. It's like, oh, we found this one post you had from 10 years ago, and now you said this one thing that we might be able to twist and turn, and we're done. You're canceled, right? And right. Gary sounds like a forgiving guy, and 20 years ago when I first started in industry, you'd see those kind of, okay, you messed up, let's move on, right? And now it's like, oh, you messed up, you're fired. It's like, it's just, you don't get that anymore.
25 years ago when I was in IT, there were a couple of times when things went sideways, and it was like, okay, what happened? How can we make that not happen again? Okay, that's your plan. Good. Let's keep moving forward. It wasn't like you're gone. But the Gary story that I love telling, and this is very appropriate to Father's Day, I think. A lot of people ask me, did Gary ever show you any Castle Greyhawk maps? Did you ever get to look at the T2 Temple of Elemental Evil manuscript? Or where did he come up with this idea? And certainly there are things like that. But my favorite Gary Gygax story of all time was, again, it was the last year I got to see him. Gary had a dinner party. He invited the folks from Troll Lord Games, people from the Circle folks who were writing for him, people he liked. And he invited us over. This was at the Lake Geneva Gaming Convention, which was a convention that the Troll Lords put together that was like the first Gen Cons. Like, they only wanted it to be a couple of hundred people. They didn't want thousands. They just wanted a small relaxed convention that Gary could be at and not have to fly or bus or train or whatever. So Gary had the dinner party, and it was like starting at 7. And I am the type of person, like, if you say an event's at 7, I will be on your porch at 6:59 and 30 seconds, looking at my watch with my hand ready to knock on your door. And that's the way it was. I didn't want to miss a chance because I knew there would be probably 75 or 100 people of the 200 people at the con that would be in and out of this thing through the evening. So I at least wanted a chance to give a manuscript to Gary that it was the one that I had worked on for him, give him the CD-ROM for that, and spend a couple minutes. Well, so we got there right at 7, and his wife Gail greeted us, and we were the only people there probably for 30 minutes. It was myself, Colleen, my wife, Mrs. the Dungeon Delver, and Gail Gygax and Gary. And Gail, now I know everybody and their brother has animosity towards Gail. This isn't about that. This is about this one evening. My wife was 4 months pregnant with our now 16-year-old daughter. And when she mentioned this to Gail, we were suddenly like long lost family. She was like, Gary, put that cigar out. Colleen, can I get you some cold water? Gary, point that fan at her. Let's open the jalousie windows. Just doting on Colleen. And Gary and I sat there and we talked, and we didn't talk about Brian and Kevin Bloom. We didn't talk about TSR, Chainmail, Greyhawk. We talked about dad stuff. And so for like a half an hour, it was just a couple of guys that knew each other well enough that we could chit chat about family matters, talking about dad things. What do you think of co-sleeping? Yeah, well, I kept Luke right here. Luke slept right here next to me, and when should a kid start what? Just all kinds of dad stuff. Like I was sitting there talking to an uncle or a cousin or something like that. And it was, it was, of all the memories I have of hanging out with Gary, that is my fondest. No, I don't know how far an elf can throw a dwarf. I don't know how many secret levels Castle Greyhawk had. But I know that Gary loved reading bedtime stories to his kids.
I laugh because you bring that up, because I've had people I've worked with, like, and having written books, I have people who reach out to me sometimes like, oh, what's the back story on this character or that character? When Gary came up with Greyhawk and this stuff was new, there wasn't a backstory, right? It was just sort of like, all right, let's figure shit out as we go along. Right? It wasn't, I have this grand Tolkien-like inspiration, and I'm going to spend however long I need to write this. It was, okay, well, I bought these toys at the toy store, and that kind of looks like an owlbear, so let's create owlbears, right? It was
exactly. Exactly. This was just stuff just coming together, and I mean, some of the great...
but that's the coolest bit. So as I've worked in inventive stuff, right? And I've worked in creative fields, and my business partner funds indie movies, and having met a bunch of people that are involved in that, some of the best stuff like has absolutely like no real, hours of inspirational thought and backstory and all this other crap that goes into it. It's like, well, let's try this. What the hell, right? And one of my favorite movies of all time is probably Caddyshack, which I know dates me as old, but I don't care because it's freaking hilarious every time you watch it.
That's a great hat. Did you get a bowl of soup with it? Or shirt? Did you get a bowl of soup with that shirt?
Yeah, it's like, I just think that half of that movie was probably improvised as they went along. Right? And here it is now. It's just this classic. Same thing. You can say the same thing about Animal House. I mean, they had sort of a general idea of how it's going to go. But a lot of times the most fun stuff is when you have a team of people. It's like, I may have one thought on how I want to do a book, but my co-author may come up with a better idea, and then we bounce them around, and 6 or 7 ideas later, we've got the one that winds up in the book. And I'm sure it was the same way with Greyhawk. There was, he had playtesters, he had 6, 7 other people kind of around it at that point in time. And was it all Gary, or was it Gary bouncing ideas off people? There was probably a Gary bouncing ideas off people somewhere. It was not, Moses goes up the mountain and comes down with 3 tablets. Oh, wait, drops one. No, 2 tablets.
All right. These 15 commandments.
Yeah.
Crack. These 10 commandments.
History of the World Part 1, Mel Brooks. If not everybody's seen it, it's a must watch.
Yeah,
if nothing else, for the world's biggest joint.
Yes.
Which was smoked by Gregory Hines. But it just, my dad was that kind of guy who would convince me that, oh, you think you've got a great idea? Well, there's somebody around the corner who has a better one. And he used to be the very humbling kind of person who would take me as soon as I started to get a big ego about something, and he would just like take that ego and like chop it down to size. And I could see Gary being somebody like that. And I kind of, some of his kids are in the RPG space, and it must be really difficult to live up to that legend, because he's now this mythical figure that everybody holds up above all the others. It's just, it's kind of hard to describe where I'm going with this, but my dad, when big things would happen, he would have this way of saying, oh, you got the ego, now what? Right. I still remember the day I got my PhD. My dad was like, okay, so what now? And here I am. I literally just came off the stage, right? Was handed my degree, walked out, Dr. Imholt, here's your hood. My dad's like, great. So what are you gonna do tomorrow? I was like, probably be hungover, but no.
Right.
He's like, no, what are you gonna do tomorrow? I'm like, well, I've got like 5 interviews lined up. Great. You should really focus on that, not on drinking. I'm like, yeah, shit, Dad's right. So it's just this way of bringing you back to reality that I thought was great. I mean, he'd let you have your fun, but you kind of have to move on and do actual things in life. And I will tie this back to a sort of gamer moment, right? So gaming can take on a lot of different things, and most good gamers tend to be very big pranksters. Okay. At least I am prankster with my kids. My dad would pull pranks. I've worked with a bunch of pranksters. When you're a scientist, you tend to be around people who do goofy things on occasion, and many of them are gamers. And the better the gamer, I found, always the more elaborate the pranks become. And sometimes the better the bluffs become. So I remember that when I first got up to MIT, I found that at postdoc, I went to work at MIT up in Cambridge. I had an office at the Institute for Soldier Nanotechnologies over on Cambridge Square, or Kendall Square. It was a great place to work. Lots of interesting work going on all around. But when you first show up on a campus like that, you find out a bunch of stuff really fast. Number one, everybody just treats everybody like a person, right? So nobody wants to be the famous whoever. Everybody's like, great, you're here. I got 15 things I need you to do, right? And they may be a Nobel laureate looking at you going, oh, cool, I'm excited to have you here, because we're short people who know how to do stuff without making the lab accidentally explode. So right. It's like, wait, somebody almost made it accidentally explode? Not this week yet. But it's like okay.
It's been 0.5 days since our last lab explosion on a big whiteboard on the wall.
Yeah, and then you later find out that was just a prank because I was the new guy, right?
Right.
But it had this really rich gaming culture. There's a lot of people up there that are video gamers, a lot of people that are RPG players, chess, all kinds of stuff. So you'd find people on the weekends up there using the big conference tables for Avalon Hill sized games, and because those boards are huge, right? So you need a lot of space for those. But I will never forget, one of the more avid gamers was this 90-plus-year-old professor who was a professor emeritus when I first got there, and I had a chance to play 1776 with him a couple times. Mm-hmm. He always chose the British, I always chose the Americans, and we were kind of 50-50. But the way I met him was hilarious, and it was sort of one of those prank moments. And I was like, okay, I got to learn to play chess with this guy. I was in one of the offices someplace, or one of the lounges, and I was working on this acoustic physics problem. And I was arguing with a guy who's now the department chair of physics, who wasn't then, but he is now. And I was like, no, it's this way, it's this way, it's this way, it's this way. Peter's a nuclear guy. I'm nanotech and general physics and RF, for lack of a better term, at least I was then. And acoustic physics is a little bit different field. And if you're into it, you're deep into it. And if you're not into it, you're kind of like noodling around the edges. Right. And all of a sudden, this 90-year-old professor walks in, and he starts he looks at the board. He goes, no, this is not right. And he comes up with an eraser and erases part of myself. I was like, what are you doing? We were working hard on it. And he goes, let me explain it to you. And I proceed to go head to head with him for 5 minutes. And I noticed after that, Peter had walked off across the room and stopped paying attention and was just kind of watching the discussion. Like, I'm not saying a word. And it took me 5 or 10 minutes to stop and go, okay, something's going on here. What the hell did just, I was like, Professor, what's your name, sir? He goes, oh, my name is Vanderveer. I was like, okay, that's your first name. Really? What's your name? Because remember, we're on a campus where people have like equations named after them and,
right.
really recognizable things. Turns out it was Vanderveer Bose. And I was arguing acoustic physics with a guy named Bose, who started a speaker company of some renown and designed most of the sonar since kind of World War II or Korea or something. I don't know. He was so instrumental in Navy sonar.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, I was like, wow, he bluffed me good. I was like, sir, do you play chess or poker? He's like, oh, I play Avalon Hill War Games. I'm like, we're going to be
nice.
So, I played with him quite often. It was kind of fun. Anyway, so I don't know why I told you that story other than when that evening I went home and called my dad and I told him about that. And he goes, so what did you learn from this? I'm like, never trust old guys. He's like, no. Introduce yourself, get their name. I was like, oh, okay, we've learned that. So he's like, and never trust old guys. I was like, so.
Just so.
Anyway, that was my big long-winded MIT dad story to tie all that together. So
I quite liked it.
Yeah. And you're right. Ultra America and TTRPG are just said, you tell the kids to make your own legend, try not to recreate your father's, but it's difficult, right? Because my dad was one of those engineers that when I got my PhD, people were like calling me to see if I was actually working in the same field as him, going, hey, can you carry on that? I'm like, he was a software engineer. I'm a physicist. We were like night and day apart from each other. So, but my last name is unique. So it stood out. And I started getting these weird offers and calls from people in Silicon Valley that knew my dad. And you're right. You can't live up to your dad's legend. You have to go do your own thing, which is part of why when I got out of the Army, it was either computer science or physics. And my dad was like, oh, pick computer science. Physics is too hard. You'll never graduate. I was like, well, number one, thanks for the vote of confidence, Dad. And number two, okay, physics is, right? And the next day I picked that and I kind of went the other way. So you do have to kind of go your own and create your own path in life. But name recognition helps, I guess, in some occasions. It certainly doesn't hurt. But anyway, except for one guy who lives in my neighborhood. There's a guy who lives around here who is the son of a shockingly famous retired Dallas Cowboy from way back when they were actually still the Dallas Cowboys. Little guy named Roger or something or other. Sawback.
Oh yeah, something like that. Yeah, vaguely familiar with that. Yeah,
his son lives not far from here, and he said it was funny when he was going into high school. He was looking at what sports to play. He's like, "I'm gonna play football." His dad's like, "Yeah, don't." It's like why? It's like you can never live up to the legend. And he's like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "Every year I'm retired, I get better." It's like the legend grows. It gets bigger and bigger every year. And he was telling me, he's like, yeah, I went and played baseball instead. And Dad was exactly right. If I'd gone into football, it would have been, oh, there's Roger Staubach's son the entire time. He's like, forget it. Anyway, you're right, Ultra American. You can't live in your dad's shadow. You got to go create your own, which annoys my kids on occasion, but that's okay. They keep wondering what they're going to do for a living.
I've worked with Heidi Gygax and her husband Eric Garland. Wonderful people, by the way. They're good. They're supposed to be down here. Like I think they may have already gotten to Central Florida, but supposed to have dinner with them next weekend. But they're like Heidi likes games. She's always liked games. Like she that was something she thought was neat. And now that she's kind of in the next chapter of her life, I don't, I don't blame her for wanting to give it a try. She absolutely, I think, understands that, they're not going to get rich. And the joke is, you too can make tens of dollars in the exciting field of tabletop role playing game writing.
And all you have to do is start with 20s of dollars.
Yeah, exactly. Start with 20s of dollars and you can make tens of dollars out of it. But no, I think I genuinely get it's something I want to do, and not, I want to bank on the name Gygax. I mean, hell, I'm not even related to Gary, and I write and publish stuff. It's something I want to do. So, but I agree with what you're saying. Ultra American, I mean, if she was going out there and heavily leaning into it, I would say maybe, but no, I think they're, I think they're taking the right approach. You can, I don't think it's wrong to want to be Allens or Junior, I guess is what I'm trying to say. You can go out there and win some races on your own, and people look favorably upon your legacy contribution, rather than, oh, you're just here because your dad was famous. So,
yeah, I mean, that only works in Hollywood, right? Works really well there, though.
Yeah, right. Right.
But anyway, all right. So I just wanted to come on and talk about dads for a while. I didn't want to talk about anything else. But like most things in streaming, especially with me or Bill, it always winds up back on role playing games or something else. So I will tell you, there are a number of streams coming up this week. I've got a live one I'm doing for a veteran thing, because I'm tired of the veteran suicide problem not getting any attention. One of the interesting numbers that came out of that, if anybody wants to share this with people, is the suicide rate among active duty military or veterans is 50% higher than the rest of the population. If you strip officers out of that number and only focus on the enlisted soldiers, it's atrociously larger. Mm-hmm. So it's just bad. So it's a problem, and it's one that's not being addressed. It's like, oh, we talk about it, we pay it lip service during every campaign, but nothing ever changes. And I think we've narrowed it down. Everybody's like, oh, we just need to get them, people treatment for PTSD. It's not about PTSD. It's about economics. Overwhelmingly, those suicides take place when the soldiers are trying to transition out of the military into civilian life and they can't find a job, or they've been unemployed or underemployed for an extended period of time. Mm. Now, me as a veteran, I got out of school. I got out of the Army, went back and got a PhD. Not everybody can do that, because a lot of them come out of the military with families, and it's very difficult to go to school when you have a family at the same time. It's not impossible, just difficult. So I was in a little bit different situation. Everybody's situation is different. I've never had suicide problems, but I do understand economic problems with the best of them. So I've had times when I was as broke as can be. I'm not anymore, but it is what it is. Then Tuesday night, we got the first edition live stream, right?
That's right. I got something really cool for that night too. So everybody, you want to tune in over on my channel for that one.
Because it's not Owlbears again. You got Rose Estes this week, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. Thursday night, Rose Estes. I will be interviewing the unmissable Rose Estes on the channel, and that's going to be loads of fun.
One thing I'd love to have her hear her talk about is, as a writer, you have to do world building and kind of character creation at the same time. She balances those two really well, and I'm just wondering if she has kind of a method to that madness, or she's just naturally gifted at balancing that.
That's a good question, and I want to answer Ultra American's question here. Let me see if I can. Did that work? Yes, there we go. Okay. Rose Estes. This is Mountain of Mirrors, one of the TSR's kind of Endless Quest, I believe was the line called. And yep. I don't want to steal her thunder other than to say she pioneered this, and these were hugely successful for TSR. So definitely catch the Rose Estes interview. It's going to be good stuff.
She also wrote all but the first two Greyhawk books were written by Gary, right? And she wrote the rest of them. So the limited Greyhawk novel series was sort
Well,
of to Gary, and she was the remainder, I think.
yeah, she wrote. Gary started writing the novel series, left TSR. I don't know the amount of acrimony at TSR. It just astounds me, but he kept Greyhawk, Gord, and all the characters from his two Greyhawk novels when he left TSR and kept publishing those.
Under Gord the Rogue.
Under the Gord the Rogue line, and Rose went in a different direction story-wise. So there's two complete arcs of Greyhawk books you can check out, and Rose wrote one of them.
So that the reason I bring her up, and even though it's Father's Day, I'm going to bring her up anyway. You see a lot of criticism in the publishing industry for women being underrepresented, and so there's some criticism of Gary saying he was didn't like women in the company or something. Yet two of the first reasonably and rationally rapidly published authors early on in TSR were women. You had Margaret Weiss and Rose Estes, right, who were all over the place in the book division, and were probably at one point 25 or 30% of the titles. Between the two of them, they were just not only prolific, but they were fast, and both of them a little bit different skill set, a little bit different style. But I don't think you could say TSR was underrepresented by women at that point in time.
No, definitely not. Definitely not.
What else do you have coming on this week?
Tomorrow night, just gonna kind of RPG news as I can find it. I'm probably gonna show off a little bit of Father's Day swag I picked up today because it's very D&D oriented and very fun. Tuesday night, Into the Pit. We'll be playing some AD&D. Wednesday, we'll see what Kyle's got on tap on Wednesday. Thursday, Rose Estes. Friday, Gamma World. We'll be playing some first edition Gamma World, continuing on with Legion of Gold, a classic Gygax adventure set in the post-apocalypse America of 2466.
So because I got bored this morning, I went on eBay and actually found a shrink track copy, first edition Gamma World. So I found one this morning. We won't discuss how much I paid for it, but it was not.
I felt it, dude.
Yeah, you're right. Quiet Keep, Andre Norton, also woman. I've got a first edition copy of it. Hang on a second.
Yes, Quiet Keep. Do I?
Hang on a second.
I think it's on the other side of the table. I'm not.
No. I have so many books in my house that I have actually started to keep a database because I'm that big of a nerd. So that when I go to the bookstore and I can go, I don't remember if I have this or not, I can actually look into the database and say, do I have that book or not? And I think you mean that one right there.
That is the one. That is the very one. And 5 seconds ago, I was ready to tell you who did that lovely cover art, and I've forgotten now. Just right out of my head.
Fantastic book. I will tell you that I actually do have a video, 2 videos about that over on my channel. If you want to go look them up, I finished rereading it recently and went and did a book review of it, and I did one where it was kind of like there was a big discussion about is it actually Greyhawk or not, and so I did a video about, yes, it's actually Greyhawk.
Yeah.
And in that, I actually had a number of people who commented because I put a picture of her in that video. People were like, I didn't know she was a woman. I'm like, well, because at the time, she started writing under pen name because her publisher thought it would be better for her. And truth be known, she kind of looked like my grandma. So it was like, I was like, wow. I knew she was a woman. I didn't know that she looked a lot like my grandma. But she kind of looked like everybody's grandma from that era.
Yeah. She was actually local to me, and I didn't realize that until after she passed away.
So, all right. So I got to ask you something, Bill, if you got a few minutes.
Oh, Tim, I got time. It's Father's Day, Sunday night. I'm chill.
When I was, and anybody in the audience who wants to pipe in on this, we have a few people around. My kids are 14, 13, and 11. Okay. I live in Frisco, Texas. I own and operate a company called One for All Social that is about to have press releases done, and I can talk about it now.
Hmm.
We have been rated the top tool to help you grow your internet accounts because of the auto hashtag tool. So there's going to be some press releases coming up about how we are the number one growth tool in the social media business, and we work with all the major 7 platforms. Not a big deal. But as a result, our company value goes crazy, right? So it's one of those moments where my kids are like, "So what are you going to do after this, Dad?" I'm like, "Well, in a couple of years, I'm going to sell the company and retire." And they're all like, "Wait, what?" You're gonna what? Well, yeah. When you guys start going off to colleges, I figure I would just kind of travel around and stay with each of you for a few weeks. And they're like, "Wait, time out, time out." It's like, um, but not really going to do that. But one of the things I am in a position to do, which is kind of not where I thought I would be at 52 years old, is to be able to retire when my daughter actually goes off to college and live wherever the hell I feel like living, okay, anywhere in the country that I feel like living. There's a few places I would look at and go, that's too expensive. Manhattan comes to mind, but I wouldn't want to live there anyway.
Mm.
I haven't narrowed down. I was thinking about Florida until I saw something about Florida in the summertime, where basically Florida in the summer is take a shower, don't dry yourself off, and try to put your clothes back on. That's Florida in the summertime.
You get used to it. You get used to it.
I'm thinking sort of Monterey Bay, California is an interesting option. Maui is an interesting option. Florida has some appeal, but I think I would want to avoid the most humid parts of the year. But
That's all of it, Tim.
Yeah.
That's all. The most humid part is yes.
I've been there in the winter. It's nice in the winter.
It is nice in the winter. We actually had a really nice spring. It only actually started getting hot towards the end of May. Really, it stayed. There was a very pleasant, cool breeze today. In fact, so it hasn't been as bad. But what was your question?
Where should I retire?
Where should you retire? I found Wisconsin to be lovely in the summer.
It gets too cold in the winter.
It does. And let us define winter to mean everything between the end of April and mid-September. Everything not winter is end of April to mid-September. Everything else is winter. At GaryCon, a foot of snow on the ground in like late March. No, thank you. Gosh, I'm not.
My dog made her present snow. Sorry about that.
That's okay. I'm not a big fan of California. Inland Oregon, maybe. That beautiful country up there. Inland Washington.
I have thought about Italy. But
that's not bad. You could hang out with Rob Kuntz. I think he's Rob lives in Corsica, man. There's half of AD&D's history in one person. You could be neighbors.
It's one of those moments where I'm like, if I don't really. So part of me also is kind of thinking along the lines of Florida, except for the months where it's really nice to be in Maine. And then just kind of back and forth.
Yeah. I mean, if you've got the scratch, Tim, I would pick a summer home someplace up north and then just snowbird down here.
Yeah, because Maine is beautiful right up until it gets cold, and then you're like, okay, we're done. Right?
Get me on a plane. I'll say this: the second time Colleen and I were in Lake Geneva, in like basically where. Like the main street, the east-west main street, the north-south main street cross in the middle of town. I probably saw more Florida license plates that weekend than I would see driving up and down the main drag outside my subdivision here in Florida. And oddly enough, in the winter, I see lots of Wisconsin license plates in Central Florida. I think every third person I talked to in Wisconsin was like, "Oh yeah, I got a friend lives down in Florida."
So here's one that you're gonna laugh at, man.
All right.
So I'll leave everybody with a funny joke that you're like, oh, gee, rich people problems. And this wasn't my problem; it was somebody else's. But I was talking with a friend of mine who works out of Silicon Valley. Who's been out there for 40 years. Actually, he's been out there a lot longer than that. But he was telling me he's got 4 homes in different places, and I was having this conversation with him. And he also flies private. I don't fly private because he's on a much different level than I am, but he does what he does, and his point was, if you're going to do that, are you going to live in one place and move around a lot? Just remember to keep the same car everywhere. And I was like, what the hell are you talking about? He goes, keep the same model car everywhere you live. And I'm like, okay, out of odd curiosity, why? Because my thought would be you just drive from Florida to Maine, not fly it. And he's like, no, keep the same model car everywhere. That way, when you get off the plane, you're absolutely certain that all your luggage fits. I'm like, wow, rich people problems, right?
The rich people problems. Rich people problems.
It's like, well, the Audi in one place was bigger than the Audi in the other, and I couldn't get all the suitcases in it. I'm like, oh, gee, that must be terrible.
Wow. Rich people problems, man.
That one's not me. That was somebody else. But I thought that one was hilarious. But anyway, all right, everybody. I just wanted to come in and talk about dads because I don't think people do that enough. I know we kind of went off the rails there for quite a while, but I think dads should be celebrated more than they are because everybody knows on Mother's Day the world stops and mom goes to the spa and dad goes off and takes care of the kids and around the house and everything else. And on Father's Day we let dad barbecue for everybody, which is fine. But I think dad's contribution sometimes should be celebrated as much as moms are. And some part of me wants to say, let's figure out a way to make that happen on a more regular basis. But as a single dad, it's kind of more obvious to me how much we aren't talked about sometimes. So anyway, all right. Unless anybody has anything else, I think that's it, Bill. Unless you have anything to add.
Nothing other than if you haven't, please click that like button. Subscribe to Tim's channel. It is awesome because you get a lovely selection of videos on all sorts of topic, both fun like this and important like the issues that veterans are facing coming up. So please do that.
All right, everybody have a great night.